You may wonder why we've read some of the passages we've read. It's because every once in a while Abba turns around and says it's time to make it very clear about these things, because they become part of popular culture, particularly from Hollywood and places like that. And so this week it's Kokhav, Tzofeh, Star Watchers. So this week Abba makes it crystal clear what he thinks of worshipping anything in the sky, and that's stars, planets, etc., and confirms that all of that is forbidden, and there is a difference between astrology and astronomy, and this is where people get confused. There's nothing wrong with astronomers. They're studying the stars, that's fine. It's the astrologers who place meanings on them and magic on them and stuff like that. It confirms as forbidden the following abominable practices performed by diviners, soothsayers, enchanters, sorcerers, spellcasters, consulters of ghosts or spirits, or a necromancer. In fact, he states that whoever does any of these things is detestable to him. He doesn't say only the people who are those things, but people that actually practice them.
And they have big halls and they have big meetings and thousands of people go to them.
Absolutely. It's become very popular. And this is what birthed the whole New Age movement, which is pick and mix. You pick, I like that bit of that religion, I like that bit of that religion, I like that bit of that religion, and I'm God, and I'll pull it all together, and I'm at the centre of it. And this includes Jewish people. Jewish people are people just like anybody else. They still follow a lot of the superstitious practices that came out of Babylon. They still use a lot of the symbols that come out of Babylon.
That's right, and it's taught in school now. Harry Potter is a school book now.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Literature.
The other day they were playing Harry, they wanted to play Harry on the bus. I never heard of Harry, and they did a couple of crosswords, and they can get them to turn. And I go, no. Why? I think children.
Yeah, try that again. I'll show you how you turn a bus into a wreck. So if he states that whoever does these things is detestable to him, he doesn't just say, I don't like it much. Detestable is a very strong word. So why do many major denominations say it's okay to communicate with the dead, even in prayer? And you say, what major denominations? In 1937, the Anglicans in the UK commissioned a report into spiritualism. Why? Because it had taken such a hold and it had got such a grip. The whole spiritualism thing had really been gaining momentum for 30 odd years there, and they were getting concerned about the threat of it. So the Archbishop of Canterbury commissioned a report into spiritualism, and at the end of it all basically agreed it was okay. It was fine, it wasn't a threat, it was okay. But the findings of that report were not released until the 70s. And even then, the findings were only released to bishops. Not interesting. Likewise, the Vatican has always promoted those things, right from the beginning. And even up until recently, they had a full-time priest, a Franciscan, called Father Gino Concetti, investigating the subject on behalf of the Pope. There's a whole department geared to it. And the Pope announced in 2007 that communicating with and through the dead was still okay. Even after all those scriptures. Yeah. How could he say anything different? Their whole church is based on worshipping statues, worshipping the dead.
But he didn't do his study in God's word, did he?
Of course not.
Not.
What's God's word got to do with it? He's the Pope. Same with the Archbishop of Canterbury. It's like, but the Anglican Church says so. The Archbishop of Canterbury sits in the House of Lords. He knows his place.
But this feeling hadn't done the necromancy thing as well. It's just like the tomb of, what's that other lady that he had, and absorbed her spirit.
Oh, yeah.
No, and he claimed that her spirit entered into him so that he can.
He was her catcher. He got his start in the profession by standing behind her when she was praying for people and catching them as they fell. He learned his trade from her.
Well, what manner of sorcery is this?
And they say, oh, it's just spirituality. It is. But there's evil spirits and not so.
I've been attending meetings and the power of God has been really strong. And people have been really powerfully healed.
Necromancy or divination from the dead and casting spells is the traditional territory of mediums, psychics and channelers, Wiccans, witches, warlocks and spiritualists. And these things are well and they're alive. There are all of these people today. Channeling is incredibly popular in Hollywood.
That's what they talk about all the time.
Yes.
And they say, Tom Jones is a channel of, Peter Pan.
Yes.
He's channeling Peter Pan.
Yeah.
Oh, Peter.
Yes.
And now it's become a term used everywhere.
That's right.
In a half-joking way.
A lot of the stars in Hollywood actually practice the whole thing, and reincarnation and all of these things, they're all forms of the same thing.
All comes from the same place.
Yeah. You mustn't eat steak because it could be your grandfather. So in 1848 in the north of England, which is where most of the revival of it started, the Fox sisters became the first of the modern day enlightened mediums of spiritualism. That by 1852, 4 years later, had spread to seances in Keighley, Yorkshire, and by 1866 Emma Britton, who was known as the mother, introduced it to New Zealand from Britain. So spiritualism was introduced into New Zealand in 1866. It's been around a while. So was Freemasonry, so was everything else. When the migrants came, they brought it with them. Dr. Arthur Conan Doyle, Dr. Arthur Doyle. Sherlock Holmes? Conan was actually added later. His name was actually Arthur Coyle. He added the Conan later. He was a Freemason. He was very high up in the whole Freemasonry movement. And he was a leading figure in a lodge in Hampshire, along with a certain Dr. Watson. So that's where he got all his characters from. That's where he got all his ideas from. And he actively promoted and went to meetings all around the country and overseas, promoting spiritualism worldwide. And he's written numerous books about spiritualism.
Is that where that church, that spiritual church or something comes from?
Yes. They were started in the north of England. It's not a new thing, but it was a revival of them. The different forms have been around for centuries. But this is where the modern spiritualist churches that you see have come from. And they're everywhere. So he wrote numerous books about it that you don't hear about. You only hear about Sherlock. And in his books he used the word intuition instead of clairvoyance. He knew what he was talking about. And when he says intuition, he's talking about clairvoyance. In his Sherlock Holmes novels. In the 1930s, when Princess Margaret was born, the Daily Express, a London paper called the Daily Express, decided to come up with a horoscope for her. It was a big thing. They hadn't done it for the Queen, which is interesting, but when Princess Margaret came along, they did a horoscope and a series of articles on omens or planets that influenced occurrences in her life and that were going to influence in her life appeared in London Daily Express. And we all know how well her life panned out. Supposedly charting her destiny. This was the first of the modern day horoscopes. And it proved so popular that it was copied and adapted on a daily basis to be used extensively by every other paper, magazine, radio and eventually TV channels. It spread to all the other major newspapers, local newspapers, then it spread to America, then it just spread worldwide. So that horoscopes became a daily feature in all of these newspapers.
And I like the way you spelled it, horror, H-O-R-R.
Yeah, I think horoscope describes it better. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, basically. If you buy into it, if you believe it. These occult-based self-fulfilling curses began to control people's lives, as witchcraft always has. Witchcraft has always been based on control. And when they cast spells, it's so that they can get control of that person's spirit. That's what it's all about. They're there to control people and situations. And no, there are no white witches, just black ones. Of course, astrology itself is much older. Astrology comes from about 1645 BCE in Babylon. And when we use these terms, we use the Jewish term, before the Common Era and after the Common Era. We don't use the before Christ and after Christ. It's an offence.
Sorry, why? We don't understand why?
Because if you're talking to Jewish people or people that are outside the whole thing and you use before Christ and after Christ, they get incredibly offended. Whereas before the Common Era and after the Common Era are much more acceptable to people. And all Jewish people will use that term, not the BC and AD.
Okay.
Because some don't believe Christ is coming.
Yes, that's right. Okay. Got it, thanks.
So this was 1645 years before Yeshua came along. In Babylon. And the original horoscopes were practiced from around 410 BCE. So they started the whole horoscope thing and using the planets and stuff like that. People don't realise that in Mesopotamia, which was where Babylon came out of, they had medicine, they had schools, they practiced charting the stars and stuff like that long before Egypt, long before Greece. Greece was not the cradle of civilization. Mesopotamia was.
But it sounds so innocent sometimes, you can see why people are...
And this is why sometimes you have to sort of regurgitate the whole thing and warn people again. Not so because I think anybody here has got a problem, but because you need to know. Because everybody around you is following these things, talking about these things.
But I read Dr. Grant's books and theology books because I didn't know.
No, and you don't. That's the whole thing. And you're not held to account for things you don't know, but once you do know, then you are. This is why we tell the truth. Not because I want to persuade people, but once you've heard the truth, then you become accountable for it, what you do with it.
It's protection too, isn't it? Because
Absolutely, it's a protection.
Like Linda, when she was young, she went to the show and she had a palm read for a big bunch of girlfriends. And the thing was that she was going to die at 30 years old.
Yeah.
Well, just before she turned 30, we'd just come into deliverance, and we were sitting there talking to the pastor at one of these sessions, and he started talking to Linda. God gave him a word of knowledge just before she turned 30.
Yeah.
And when he prayed for her, there was a strong manifestation of demons. It was really strong from it. And she got free from it. But, like, the grace of God, eh?
Yeah.
And she's forgotten all about it.
Yeah.
So astrology, as part of the everyday planning of events and people's lives, dominated the deeply superstitious courts and villages of most ancient kingdoms, and particularly in Europe throughout history. But it fell out of favour in the 17th century. Why? Because that was so-called Age of Enlightenment. You know why Friday the 13th is unlucky? It's because that's the day that the Freemasons were kicked out of France. Friday the 13th. This is why when the guys went to America, they put the upside down pyramid and the eye on the banknotes, was to commemorate that Friday the 13th as a disastrous day. Yeah. And they went to Scotland, and I'm not going to go back into that again, but basically it's a superstitious thing coming from actual events.
So what's the thing on the back of our license that's like a spider leaf with scars? What is that?
Oh, they've got all sorts of symbols and things, yeah. So during the New Age, science became the new thing. Scientific credentials was becoming more important, and the Vatican did not like that, which is why they persecuted a lot of the astronomers, because they changed from being astrologers to astronomers. Copernicus was an astronomer, not an astrologer. He was an astrologer, but then he changed to astronomy. And the fact that a lot of the major astrology prediction failures didn't go down too well with most of the people in these ancient kingdoms and courts. Prior to that time, Galileo, Copernicus were astrologers, not astronomers. One of the first questions that secular people ask you when they meet you in a party or a cocktail party or anywhere else is, what's your star sign? Isn't that interesting? That's the most important thing to them. What's your star sign? And girlfriend, boyfriend. Oh, I have to know your star sign. We may not be compatible. So what's a star sign? It's a sign based on the various planet alignments with the sun when you're born. My alignment is with Yahweh and his son Yeshua, and my sign is the menorah. So if people ask me what my sign is, I say the menorah. If people ask me who my rabbi is, I say Yeshua. And they will. You talk to Jewish people and they'll say, who's your rabbi? My rabbi is Yeshua. Simple. They usually stop talking to me at that point. But of course there are many accessories that are actually needed and used to practice these dark arts, including rune stones, which is a Norse-Germanic method of casting spells, tarot cards, which is a form of divination that actually started life as a popular card game, but with more than the normal 52 cards. And it was made popular where? In Italy. But it was reinvented and popularised in 1910 with the so-called American deck. Popular, yes, but not distributed widely until the 1970s. And then it was followed closely in 1972 by Jane Roberts establishing channeling in America, which is incredibly popular with Hollywood and the music industry. The other thing that's out there, Ouija boards. It's another method of communicating with the dead. That's what it's all about. And again, it attracted a popular following among the young. And it basically combines the French oui and the German ja. And both mean yes. So basically, when you're saying a Ouija board, you're saying a yes board.
Those Ouija boards are really powerful.
Yes, they are.
My granddaughter tell me stories about horrible things that happen when they're kids. And they're doing it in office.
Oh, they are.
Like real scary, supernatural things.
Sure.
Like things moving.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the spiritual world is real.
It's sold in toy stores.
Yeah, well that's because Milton Bradley was the one who came up with the idea. They were the ones who created it.
Yeah.
Milton Bradley, the toy company.
Yeah, well this is what... where have I got?
Up to Ouija board.
Yeah, it was invented as the talking board in 1854 by Adolf Wagner as a mind reader. It was meant to originally be for mind reading, and that's why he established it, but then it was changed. 7 years later, it was reinvented to channel or communicate with the dead. And where it gained its real popularity was just after the First World War. You had a lot of desperate, hurting, grieving people. And so they turned to anything, any chance. Because a lot of them, they weren't there when their loved ones were killed. They were on the battlefield in all sorts of places. And so they were desperate to communicate with one last time, and it became incredibly... And they had huge parties where they introduced all of these things. And of course the schools were one of the main places that it was introduced, and it still is. All of these things will be introduced to young people as an exciting thing, as a new... It's just a game, you know. As Sally was saying, it's not just a game. So it gained popularity after First World War, following the massive loss of life, and again after the Spanish flu at the same time. People don't realise the Spanish flu claimed more lives than World War I. Later, when it really took off, was when Parker Brothers released it as a board game in 1966. Isn't it interesting? It was the mid-60s it was released as a board game. During the age of Aquarius. Which is now known as the New Age. It's still the same thing, they've just carried it on. It's the New Age of neo-paganism. Ancient and modern soothsayers, they're still around today, use the three elements of sun or fire, water or seasons, and air or planets to formulate the zodiac signs. Again, this was taken from the Babylonian mystery religion, which was inherited by Rome. The Babylonian mystery religion became part of the Roman pantheon. It became part of their whole thing, which is why they wear a lot of the regalia that came from the Babylonian mystery religion, and follow a lot of the same doctrines. So it was inherited by Rome. For the Romans, Venus is love and Mars is war. So when Venus and Mars get together, you got a problem. And each of the other planets are also seen as gods and worshipped. The Romans worshipped all of the signs, all of the gods. So did the Greeks. It was all about worshipping stars and their meanings and who they were and the gods behind them. Standing stones that I talked about before, that are not of God, are known as dolmen. And Stonehenge is dolmen. They're not just random stones that are there. They're called dolmen. And what they basically do is they put them around a place where there's supposed to be great magnetic influence, where power emanates from, and they're basically a loudspeaker. They put these dolmen around to amplify the spiritual power that comes from these things. Stonehenge was built by the Druids. The Druids' whole thing. That's why they worship there. They amplify the energy emanating from junctions called ley lines. And you will still see ley line maps of England and other countries. And most of the churches were built on ley lines to emanate the power. And the ley lines are particularly important at solstices or changes in seasons. And many ancient religious buildings, including Notre Dame, and before I carry on with that, there were 7 Notre Dames. Not just one. All you hear about now is the Notre Dame Cathedral. But there were 7 of them, and they were all built on ley lines. And they all had dolmen built into their foundations. And the one that you see now, it's still got the dolmen buried in the foundations there to emanate the spiritual power in the Notre Dame Cathedral. And the reason they have the pointed spires is for that energy to be channeled.
So they're like Greenwich, they're like the Greenwich...
The Greenwich Mean Line, it's a ley line. Yeah.
And what kind of spirits then, what kind of power is coming up?
Pagan power.
Pagan.
All pagan. The churches are built there because that's what they followed. It was all built on those ancient... Paganism was the thing. All they basically did was take paganism and move it indoors.
You know where Diana and Charles got married?
Yes.
When they come up and have to walk around that thing, what's that there on the ground?
That's another pentagram, the same as they've got in other cathedrals. Not Winchester, what's the other one further on? Salisbury. Salisbury Cathedral has got the biggest pentagram you've ever seen, set right in the entrance to the whole thing. And the people that used to go into the cathedral would sort of touch their foreheads and bow down to it as they walked in.
Just say something, Jim. Just remember that all this whole subject is actually coming from Satan.
Absolutely.
We have authority over Satan.
Yeah.
So all these are just little kids belonging to the Father, or whatever you might call it that way.
That's right.
So we have complete authority over the whole thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just for that there.
So as I said before, magic, or the art of illusion, is now immensely popular. And it's got even more popular with the added illusion of TV thrown into the mix. It's amazing what you can do on TV. What you see is not what you get. This whole thing comes from the Persian priests called the Magos, or the Greek Magi, which was turned into Magica, and they became the Magi that you read about in the King James. They were never the Magi. They were 3 Eastern kings. They were not Persian magicians. That's where the word magic comes from, when it was translated into Greek. Although as Eastern kings, they would have had court astrologers advising them about where the planets were and where the star was. Nostradamus, people still follow him. Religiously. Nostradamus was actually an astrologer. That's what his profession was. And finally, they exposed him, and he finally had to admit that his infamous almanac was all plagiarised material, most of it from predictions based on biblical prophecy. So no wonder some of it came true. Hitler was also a superstitious devotee of all things occult. A strong, practicing Catholic, started life as a Catholic, died as a Catholic. And he was a devotee of all things occult. The whole German 1,000-year reign was based on the occult. And he had court astrologers, like most of the ancient kings in Europe had had. And his astrologers advised him every step of his evil way. He wouldn't put a foot out of bed in the morning unless the astrologer said it was okay.
Yeah, I read about that.
Yeah.
Wasn't his parents Jewish?
One of them was, yeah. But his mother was Catholic, and he was a practicing Catholic. He was brought up as a Catholic, and he was still a Catholic. But it's okay to, in that case, you can mix the two, and it's no problem. There's not much difference.
He was a Jewish Catholic.
He was a Jewish Catholic. Oxymoron. So, two of his main astrologers were Wilhelm Wolff and a Swiss man named Karl Kraff. Unfortunately, they didn't survive his wrath for long because they got it wrong one too many times, particularly towards the end. But his astrologers didn't last because when they got it wrong, he got rid of them for some reason.
Well, that's the problem. It's like second rate guys, and you have these mighty kings like Nebuchadnezzar, and he asked all the soothsayers, interpret his dreams. And they were scared to because they knew they couldn't get it right until Daniel came along. And
it's the same with all these things. They tell people what they want to hear.
yeah.
Yep. That's why it says, don't tickle their ears, tell them the truth.
Most people don't want to hear the truth if it's
Exactly.
bad to them.
Yeah. And today, a lot of the organisations will tell people what they want to hear and gear their services and everything else to what they want to do. You want disco? We'll bring disco. You want guitars? We'll bring guitars. You don't like the organ? We'll get rid of the organ. We'll have balls, we'll have laser lights, we'll have whatever you want. It's a good, great recruiting campaign, but it doesn't tell them the truth. It doesn't lead them in the truth. So why all this information? Well, for one purpose and one purpose only. It is all seductively evil and an absolute abomination. even in its seemingly innocuous popular cultural forms. It is expressly forbidden by Yahweh and needs to be exposed to the light for the destructive, dangerous and demonic, in origin and practice, abomination that it is. It is certainly not just a bit of harmless fun as it's mostly portrayed. But everybody reads their horoscope. But everybody's got a star sign. But No. Doesn't mean we're all damned to hell if we've done this as we've grown up. We've all done different things as we've grown up. It's part of growing up. It's what we do about it now that counts. And if there's still an issue with any of those things, just go to Abba. You're not fooling him. He knows. You can't hide it from him. That's always our thing when we've done something wrong like that. We sort of go and try and hide in the garden. It doesn't work. Oh, but I've done something evil. How do you know that? You eaten the fruit? The message is clear. With all of these things, all the players lose. There are no winners. In all of these things, these so-called games, everybody loses.
Isn't that the program that was on TV for so long, where they go to those mediums to find out who killed what so many years ago?
Oh yeah. Yeah, the police actually pay these people and use them to try and track down bodies and all sorts of things, yeah.
What I want to know is if there's a good wild feathers in there.
Yes. Yes.
Pamela's auntie in particular was into astrology in a big way. She used to go to fortune tellers and stuff like that. And she was the matriarch of the family, so everybody was influenced by that. The minute she got redeemed, she did a complete about face. So the first meeting she went to was the Prayer for Israel meetings. We never said a word to her. When she said she'd been to a Prayer for Israel meeting, I said, well, how did you know about that? And she said, well, I went to the church and somebody took me. And she just went to all their conferences, she went to everything. And I think there's got to be something in there, spiritually, that drew her to it. And she had such a burden for Israel, and yet there was none of that before that.
She was right to the cult.
Totally the opposite.
You could imagine.
Yes.
But we led her to the Lord, and we led my mum and her.
But her mother, Pamela's grandmother, was baptised in a Foursquare church just before she was born. That's why she called her Grace. And through a series of circumstances, the whole family fell away because the 16-year-old daughter had cancer and died, and so she went completely away, and the whole family went away. But it's interesting, that foundation was there. And this church I'm talking about, when she went to it, was that very Foursquare church that all those years ago. And how old was that lady when we walked in? 92. And as soon as she walked in, she said, "You're Grace." The last time she'd seen it, Foursquare was the origin of all the Pentecostal churches, Elam, AOG and everything else. But here's this 92-year-old, this old lady walks in. The last time she saw us, when she was like that, she said, "You're Grace. I remember you and your sister." And I think, where did that come from?
Sorry, I thought you mentioned a whole different picture in my head when you said that.
But all I can think is that she obviously looked like a mother. But, so we've seen it in practice. Where the ripples went out and destroyed the whole family, then that happened and all the ripples came back in again.
That was amazing because we had such a fruitful time.
Yeah.
Meeting all the families.
One by one, they all came back to him.
Yeah.
Once that had been broken.
Wow.
Right.
There's that vision.
Today's versions of these so-called games, of course, are mostly electronic. Computer-based fantasies that hook you and then draw you into a virtual reality world that you become absolutely addicted to. And we've seen it over and over again. People, they're living in this alternate world that's much more palatable to them than the real one. And they become totally addicted to these things. They get totally sucked in. Which means when that happens, it's got to be spiritual, not just physical.
It's also when they make a Kokhav, they can go back to start.
Yes. Yeah, we were all brought up on that. I mean, the old cartoons. They died, they got up again, they died, they got up again. So we were used to that. And then they do it for real and they wonder why they don't get up. They actually hold you prisoner mentally. How? By drawing you slowly but surely into a virtual occult twilight that leaves you brainwashed and depressed between fixes. Like any chemical fix, it's fine when you're on the high, but boy is the low tough. So of course the enemy's gone high tech. Why? To turn an entire generation of young people into antisocial phone and internet zombies. And then they call it a social network. It's anything but a social network. It's an unsocial network. Because you don't actually interact with real people. All those people that are talking to all these wonderful, sexy people, and then they find out it's 64-year-old grandfathers online. You don't know who's behind the name on a computer.
No. Just young girls. And they play these games all day and all night. They're the dark of the world.
Absolutely. Actually, well, I still remember it. I saw something, was it last night? They're talking about the suicide rate in Arnhem Land in Australia. And they're saying they had the highest suicide rate in the world in Arnhem Land. And this woman suddenly decided she was going to do something about it. And in 2 years, she's taken it from the highest suicide rate in the world to zero. In Arnhem Land, which is the top part of Australia.
I thought it was an island.
Arnhem Land, no, it's part of Western Australia, I think.
Where the Aboriginal one is.
Yeah. Traditional Aboriginal land. But she's taken it from that to zero. And they said, well, how did you do it? She said, it's simple. We walk and we talk. She gets alongside people and she talks to them and walks with them. And if they've got a problem, they come and talk to her and everything else like that. To take it from that to zero, we've got something to learn.
Yeah. And she said she's available 24 hours.
She's available 24 hours a day to them.
Anyone feeling down or depressed, she'll say, yeah, come walk, let's talk.
Yep.
I went to a podiatrist once and he said, the families that walk together stay together.
What happens when they have knee surgery? No. So, they draw you slowly into a virtual occult twilight that leaves you brainwashed and depressed between fixes. Of course the enemy's gone high tech. Done all of that. By a viral network that turns their lives into virtual reality. That becomes the real world. Everything out here isn't the real world. That's their real world. That's where their friends are. That's where they're safe. That's where they're secure.
I know one young chap who's addicted to those games on the computer. So much so now that he can't sleep at night. He's attacked by demonic spirits constantly.
Of course.
And there's physicians, doctors he's gone to, call it sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis.
Paranoid?
No, paralysis.
Sleep paralysis, yeah.
Yeah, sleep paralysis. That's what he calls it. It's nothing to do with sleep paralysis.
No.
It's just a demonic spirit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, from the game.
Which is what they're all designed to do. Now, as it happened, they get into the simple games, the normal games, and then that becomes easy, and then they go to the next one, and they gradually get sucked into it. The most popular things are this.
Candy Crush.
But this world. There's something about worlds, War of Worlds, or something like that. Anyway, World of Warcraft, and World of Warcraft. You have your own people, you build your own towns, you build your own cities, you modernise them. Some of them, the cities things, they get to the whole thing where you control the whole thing, the finances, the roading, you get sucked into the whole thing. And there's a fear, it's like, but if I leave it, it'll fall apart. You become... It's like the thing that the Japanese brought out, because Japanese kids couldn't have pets in these tiny little apartment things. So they brought out the Furbies and things like that. They brought out computer things. And I remember having one of these things on my desktop that was really cool, this fish. But you have to feed it on time. You have to clean it on time. You have to do all of these things. And then you think, I don't need this. This has got me full time. It becomes a full-time occupation. You can't leave it. You're going to kill the fish, or, you know.
I think it was because, like, the original Tamagotchi only had one life, and if it died, you had to buy a brand new one. and then the company goes, no, that's a silly idea, let's make it so. And then a lot of these kids will get out and they go, oh, like Nick had one, and he said, oh, it's a girl. And he deletes it, and it's another one. Oh, you know, I don't like this one. He's like, you know, that's not very nice to do.
But this is what young people have been brought up with. We're living in a digital age. We're living in the advertising generation. Advertising controls their entire lives.
Come on, give us a good thing.
So they call it a social network, which is a viral network that turns their lives into a virtual reality soap opera, which is played out on Facebook, Twitter and all the other impersonal blogs with their virtual friends. As a result, they're completely hooked because they're afraid that somebody might unfriend them. They're afraid that they're going to get trolled, where people attack their sites and put all sorts of terrible things about them, even though they don't know them on it. Even worse, that they might actually miss some trivial pursuit that might be happening somewhere on the planet. They might miss something and not know what's happened. So again, another word, abracadabra. It's actually used by the Romans to ward off evil spirits. And when it was placed in a magical triangle or a pyramid shape, it warded off evil spirits. And New Agers now, I remember seeing it with my son-in-law. He had this plastic pyramid on his coffee table, and it had what looked like one of those shaved scarers. Looked like a steel wool scour inside, a gold one, but it was like metal shavings inside this thing, and it was on his coffee table. And I talked to my granddaughter and said, what's that? Oh, it's not supposed to be here. And she snatched it away and put it in the bedroom. Daddy doesn't like people to see things like that. They're his private things. Because he's completely into New Age, positive thinking.
He had it on the coffee table.
Because he knew we were coming.
To ward off...
That's why we weren't supposed to know about it. Negativity. So, the Brillo pad was there for our benefit. Yeah. And the word hocus pocus comes from the Latin hoc est enim corpus meum, or this is my body. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. And it was used in when they were doing the communion thing. It was a term that was used when they did the magic trick that Rome created by declaring that communion wafers and wine perform a magic trick and become the real blood and the real flesh, or transubstantiation. And hocus pocus was the term that they used for that to happen. And it's supposed to have had special healing powers when you took the wafer because of that. Substituting the actual middle matzah or afikomen and the third cup of the Seder to remember and celebrate what Messiah achieved for us once a year at Pesach is the real thing. Not some magic trick that the more it's performed, the better you feel. The word hoax, which means an elaborate scam, also came from that same sentence. Isn't that interesting? The word hoax came from that particular saying, hocus pocus. It's an elaborate scam, so at least they're being truthful. So the good news is, speak up, inform, proclaim the truth, break off the yokes and set people free from religious superstition. People talk about superstition. The worst form of superstition is religious superstition. Why? Because it's so powerful and take them away from the death grip of spiritual bondage. That's what he said, my yoke is easy. They've got these huge yokes that men place on them and yet won't lift a finger to help them carry. It's time to break off these yokes, and it's time to take on his yoke, which is light. And it took me years to understand that, because I used to be doing this for the church and that for the church, and 15, 16-hour days of missionary work, stuff like that. And when he turned around and said, my yoke's light, I turned around and said, you've got to be kidding. I had a much lighter yoke before I joined the church. What he's talking about is, we can't do anything about it. We can't carry the load. We're not meant to. We're supposed to come alongside him, and when they train young horses or whatever, they yoke them with the most experienced one, not to weigh them down, so that they learn which direction to go in. So if the experienced one goes in that direction, they have to follow. Eventually, they cooperate and do it willingly. But initially, if they don't want to go that way, they get dragged. And they have to learn the right ways to go and the things to do. So we need to break them free from religious superstition and the death grip of spiritual bondage. Not with harsh criticism, but with gentle truth that will set them free. So shalom, Sadiq Aleph, or righteous one, shalom.